morning and welcome to Sharper Iron. Spend the next hour with us studying the living and active Word of God, His two-edged sword of law and gospel, recorded for you in Holy Scripture, all about Jesus Christ, crucified, risen, and ascended for you. Thanks for tuning in this morning here on KFUO, Christ for you, anytime, anywhere. I'm your host, Pastor Timothy Appel of Faith Lutheran Church in Godfrey, Illinois. Sharper Iron is underwritten by Lutheran Church Extension Fund. Together in Faith, LCEF helps to start, sustain, and strengthen LCMS ministries through financial and strategic partnerships. Visit lcef.org for more information. On this Monday, May 12th, we're studying 1 Kings chapter 7, verses 1 to 51. In today's text, Solomon builds his palace in Jerusalem, and he provides furnishings for the temple of the Lord. To help us sharpen our faith in Christ as we study God's Word today, we have with us regular guest, Pastor Jacob Dandy. Pastor Dandy serves at Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Atchison, Kansas. Pastor Dandy, welcome back to Sharper Iron.
Yeah, it's really nice to be here with you. We're gonna have a fun discussion today.
Yeah, so we get to look at 1 Kings chapter 7, lots of architectural details. Just remind us of the context here in 1 Kings before we start reading this chapter.
Yeah, so in 1 Kings now, Solomon has come into his kingship, and one of the great things that David had in his heart during his reign was that he was going to build a temple for the Lord. David looked around Jerusalem. He saw that he lived in a grand palace, and that the Lord dwelled in a tabernacle, in a tent. And he said, I desire to build a temple for my Lord. At first, he goes to Nathan the prophet and says, hey, Nathan, I want to build a temple for God here, as he is gracious for us and good to us. And Nathan says, go ahead, the Lord be with you. I think this is a good idea. And then God says, no, let's not do that. And God tells David, no, you're not to be the one to build my temple. Because you have been a man of war, but when I bring a time of peace in the time of your son, in his time, I will have him build a temple for my name. And so now Solomon has come into his kingship. He has been firmly established now as king. There's no rivals. There's peace on all of his borders. All of these things are well, and he has set up his kingship. He's got his prayer for wisdom has been answered. He's set up his officials to kind of help govern his kingdom, and now it's time to build. And so he's made treaties with Hiram, the king of Tyre, to provide building materials and workers, and all of these things. And the building of the temple has taken place. But of course, if you're going to have a temple, you're also going to need the implements of worship in the temple. And that's kind of where we'll be coming in today at chapter 7.
That's right. So the temple itself, the building, has been constructed in the previous chapter. Before we hear more about the temple, we hear a little bit about another building project that Solomon undertook in the first part of 1 Kings chapter 7. I'm going to read those 12 verses to get us started. Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished his entire house. He built the house of the forest of Lebanon. Its length was 100 cubits, and its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. And it was built on 4 rows of cedar pillars, with cedar beams on the pillars. And it was covered with cedar above the chambers that were on the 45 pillars, 15 in each row. There were window frames in 3 rows, and window opposite window in 3 tiers. All the doorways and windows had square frames, and window was opposite window in 3 tiers. And he made the hall of pillars. Its length was 50 cubits, and its breadth 30 cubits. There was a porch in front with the pillars, and a canopy in front of them. And he made the hall of the throne where he was to pronounce judgment, even the hall of judgment. It was finished with cedar from floor to rafters. His own house where he was to dwell in the other court back of the hall was of like workmanship. Solomon also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken in marriage. All these were made of costly stones, cut according to measure, sawed with saws, back and front, even from the foundation to the coping, and from the outside to the great court. The foundation was of costly stones, huge stones, stones of 8 and 10 cubits. And above were costly stones, cut according to measurement, and cedar. The great court had 3 courses of cut stone all around, and a course of cedar beams. So had the inner court of the house of the Lord and the vestibule of the house. We'll pause there at verse 12 to talk about the palace of Solomon. So we get the note at the very beginning of the chapter. Solomon built his own house. It took him 13 years. That's a longer time than took the temple. There are some details here, Pastor Dandy, but not as many as we really might like when you start to look at it. Talk to us about
Hmm.
this section.
Yeah, so there's uh, a couple of takes here that you could probably gain from the text on Solomon building his palace. One take is that, well, he has this massive palace structure. It's several acres. It's big, and really it's kind of built in the manner of kings in that time in history. If you look at excavations of royal palaces from Babylon or Mari or any of these other important cities in the ancient world, you're going to see kind of similar things where there's going to be multiple houses in these palace compounds. And, there's going to be one place where the king goes about his judicial business. There's going to be a place where the king has quarters for his servants. There's going to be a place where the king has, quarters for his wives. And then there's going to be the place where he sleeps. Yeah, all of this stuff is pretty common. And so you could take it that, Solomon's kind of taking on the role of a worldly king. And you can maybe even say, oh, look, Solomon has all these mixed up priorities. It took him only 7 years to build the temple. He only focused on that for so long, but he took 13 years to build this grand and beautiful house for himself. I mean, that's a possibility. I mean, and certainly we see that later in Solomon's kingship, where he's very interested in amassing wealth and treasure, and that sending his ships to get gold from Ophir and all of these other things. You could say that that's what's going on. I would say that there's maybe a little bit more going on here than just that. First, we want to remember what Solomon's kingship really symbolizes to the people of God at that time, right? That there was this promise of a messianic king from the house of David, that God had promised that he was going to continually support the kingship of David and his royal household, and all of this continues to take place in this reality that God is being faithful to his promise. God has promised to establish the son of David in strength. And then that goes on to a messianic reality and a messianic promise, right? That this palace is a symbol of the greater and ongoing messianic kingship of God's people. That there would be one from the house of David who would rule over God's people forever, right? And so that dwelling would be in Jerusalem with the people, that dwelling would be amongst the kingdom of God. And so you have maybe kind of a type of this John 1:14 reality, where we have Jesus, right? And what does it say about Jesus? That the word of God was made flesh and made his tabernacle or his dwelling among us, right? And so this points to something greater, right? And so you have the king in his kingdom. He's enacting justice, and there is a place for that. And it points to this incarnation of Christ, where Christ dwells in our midst. And then you have some other kind of cool images there. The house of living stones that the house is made out of. It's made out of the forest of the trees of Lebanon, and so you have maybe this renewed Eden, or this renewed place of beauty, where God is dwelling and ruling through his king amongst his people. And so I'm ascribing too much symbolism to the house of Solomon, but I think there is some good dignity and wisdom there that the temple of Solomon lends, or not the temple, the palace of Solomon lends to both the kingship but also the messianic promise of Jesus.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the House of Solomon, his palace, the first time I read it in many years, I kind of was like, Solomon, you spent too long on it. You should have spent longer on the house of the Lord, and viewed him in a little bit more negative light than perhaps was fair. Thinking about his palace, it has to be kind of big, and probably has to be bigger than the temple itself, just in terms of functionality,
Yeah,
particularly when you think about the number of people that we'll find out are a part of Solomon's household going forward. Like, all of those wives and concubines didn't just show up on one day, so he
yeah.
needs a large place for people to live, and
Yeah. Well,
it's not an
you also have
unimportant thing.
this. You have this reality. How many people go into the temple? Actually
Right,
go
that's
in.
it too. Yeah, in
Yeah,
terms of
one dude.
functionality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it doesn't
Well,
have to be a big building. The other
well,
thing that Dr. Meyer pointed out in his commentary on Kings is that the one thing that's missing from the account of the palace is gold. There's lots of gold in the previous chapter for the temple. That's
yeah,
missing from Solomon's palace, as if he does seem to recognize the relative importance of these buildings, even if there's a difference in time and size. The other thing that I think the writer of Kings gives to us is, as we kind of noted, there are some details here, but not tons. You'd love to find out more about this building complex,
yeah,
and we only get 12 verses compared to how many more verses concerning the temple in chapters 6 and 7. And so just
yeah, yeah.
by the amount of space that's dedicated in the text, you do see the importance of the palace compared to the importance of the temple.
Yeah, yeah, and the palace is almost a footnote to the author of
Yeah,
First Kings, right? And I think, and that I think that's a very important to realize. Also, along with that, if you've ever done any like building projects within a congregation, you know that there's going to be things that people are more interested in donating money and time and energy into, and there's going to be things that people are less interested in donating money and time and energy into. And so you realize people are going to be probably way more interested in dedicating time and energy and effort into the temple of the Lord, and that project's probably going to finish up first. And so I think there's stuff to acknowledge and realize with that as well.
yeah,
And so there's some practical reality to that, but then also, yeah, the emphasis in the text at least is certainly still on, well, the house of God.
yeah,
The house of Solomon is mentioned because it was one of the part of the big building project, and certainly resources and time went into it. But I really think that it's mentioned with a purpose of denoting that, hey, God is being faithful to his
yeah,
promise to David, that God was going to multiply and strengthen the kingship of David's descendants, and this is coming in Solomon. And you get kind of you get a mini fulfillment of the messianic promise in Solomon, and that he brings peace to the people of God, that he rules the people of God in a good and faithful manner, that these things are happening. Now, Solomon doesn't always do that. Solomon's a sinner, and that's why Solomon needs a savior like the rest of us. He's not Jesus. But you see that God has kept his promise up to this point, and we see that in the house of Solomon being built in a nice, grand, and big manner. And
yeah.
so it works that way.
Yeah, that's right. There are a number of reasons which we will see the sins of Solomon in the text of First Kings, especially going forward. The point here is that this is probably not one of those places, given the details here. Rather,
Yeah.
the construction of his palace is, I think, largely a positive thing within the text for all the reasons that we've given. Solomon, there's plenty of reasons to criticize him, but this does not seem to be one of those. So the author of Kings quickly comes back then to the temple and its furnishings. And before we start getting some of the details concerning these furnishings, he introduces another person to us who has a name that's familiar, but this is a different Hiram. So I'm just going to read the next two verses of text here in 1 Kings chapter 7. And King Solomon sent and brought Hiram from Tyre. He was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in bronze. And he was full of wisdom, understanding, and skill for making any work in bronze. He came to King Solomon and did all his work. So that's verses 13 and 14 of our chapter. We have another man named Hiram. This is not the king Hiram, but this is a skilled worker Hiram. And briefly, I think it's just worth noting the way that he's described being full of wisdom, understanding, and skill, very reminiscent of the way that the Lord was with a man named Bezalel in the book of Exodus concerning the construction of the tabernacle. The Lord provides the skilled workers needed for the construction of his house yet again.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's awesome. I think that's a great insight that you have there. I also think it's very interesting. That this man from Tyre, he he's also of through his mother at least of the tribes of Israel. He's from Naphtali, and he's been called here to apply his purpose. And I would imagine that this is a delight to him. right? That he gets to come and help participate in the building of the temple of his Lord, right? And so his father is from Tyre. He's a man from Tyre, but you can see that even now in this history of the people of God, that though they are among the nations in some parts of in some places, that they are still faithful worshipers of God. And yeah, once again, you see that God gave him wisdom, he gave him understanding, God gave him skill, right? And all of this comes for the purpose of doing his work, right? And I think that's a really good insight that you share there. That Hiram from Tyre, not the same Hiram as King Hiram, as far as we can tell, but a worker of bronze and a guy who's good at his job. So very good.
Absolutely. Yes. All right. So now we get to hear of Hiram's work. It starts with two pillars and their capitals. We're picking up the text again in verse 15. He cast two pillars of bronze. 18 cubits was the height of one pillar, and a line of 12 cubits measured its circumference. It was hollow, and its thickness was 4 fingers. The second pillar was the same. He also made two capitals of cast bronze to set on the tops of the pillars. The height of the one capital was 5 cubits, and the height of the other capital was 5 cubits. There were lattices of checker work with wreaths of chain work for the capitals on the tops of the pillars, a lattice for the one capital and a lattice for the other capital. Likewise, he made pomegranates in 2 rows around the one lattice work to cover the capital that was on the top of the pillar, and he did the same with the other capital. Now the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars in the vestibule were of lily work, 4 cubits. The capitals were on the 2 pillars and also above the rounded projection which was beside the lattice work. There were 200 pomegranates in 2 rows all around, and so with the other capital. He set up the pillars at the vestibule of the temple. He set up the pillar on the south and called its name Jachin, and he set up the pillar on the north and called its name Boaz. And on the tops of the pillars was lily work. Thus the work of the pillars was finished. That takes us through verse 22. We have these 2 pillars which are named and the capitals that sit upon them. Lots of detail here. Take us into this section, Pastor Dandy.
Yeah, so you had Jachin and Boaz. Jachin was to the south, and Boaz was to the north. We remember that the temple complex faced it from east to west, and they were about 27 feet tall, 18 cubits, and their capitals on the top. These would have been uh, um, like almost like a blossom or a crown or something on the top of it. Those were about 7.5 feet tall, right? And so you look at these features; they're adorned with lattice work. They've got pomegranates on them. They have lily work, right, on them. And so you look at this and you think, okay, so this is very similar to some of the engraving work that's on the inside of the temple upon the gold plating that's on the inside of the temple. And you see that there's this reality that you have the lilies and the pomegranates. You have these images of maybe life and abundance, right? We adopt the same imagery here. We just recently had Easter. And what's the big symbol of Easter that we have within the church? We festoon the church with lilies, right? And this is a symbol of spring, a newness of life, that life comes from the altar of God, that life comes from the work that God has done for us. And, it's really interesting just architecturally that you have these freestanding pillars, right? Typically pillars serve like an architectural purpose, right? They will hold up some sort of roof or structure or something like that, but they are freestanding. And really I think that this goes to establish this idea that God is the strength of his people. And that goes with the names, right? So you had Jachin. That really means he will establish, or God establishes. And you have Boaz, and God is strength, and him is strength, right? And so these are kind of more visual declarations of who is the strength of God's people. Where does the strength of God's people come from? As these stand before the entrance of the house of God, this is a reminder: God is our strength. God will establish us as a people. God will do the work of all of these things, right? Of building up Israel, of saving Israel, of strengthening Israel. And so they see that God himself is the one who brings prosperity. God is himself the one who brings judgment. God himself is the one who is going to send forth mercy. And we can turn to him as he has promised to be in the temple for us, in his temple for us, when we are in need, right? And so he's the one who's going to uphold his people. He's the one who's going to uphold the worship of his temple. And he's going to bring about this beauty and sweetness, this holiness, this newness of life, this regeneration of life continually for his people. And it's all going to be bound up in what he does in the temple. Namely, he's going to receive the sacrifices of his people. He's going to establish his fellowship with his people, and namely, he's going to have mercy on his people. And so this is what is the strength of God's people? It's not anything other than that God is merciful, right? God shows forgiveness. And once again, that really all should be viewed Christologically as we think about that. How does God establish and strengthen his people? Well, it's through his mercy, and ultimately it's through the mercy of a different pillar, and it's the pillar that the Son of Man is lifted up on. It's the cross now, right? It's Christ himself dying for our sins, which is everything in the temple points to that reality. It's all about Jesus.
Yeah, one of the things about these freestanding pillars that I also think is worth pointing out that I hadn't really thought about until I was reading this before our conversation is that all the details that we've heard previously in chapter 6 concerning the ornate decorations within the temple would not have been seen by the majority of Israelites. You kind of mentioned that earlier when it comes to the size of the temple. There's not really that many people of Israel that get to go in and see the parts of the temple that have been thus described already on a regular basis. The ornate and beautiful decor of these two pillars is something that can be seen by all the people of Israel when they go to or near the temple, reminding them of what is inside, even if it's not before their eyesight. The mention of the pomegranates, the lilies, as you talked about the lilies that we have in church still today. One thing I noticed throughout this section is that there's a number of these very natural details and decorations, such that I find it to be a reminder of what happened in the Garden of Eden. That
Yeah.
what's happening here as God comes to dwell in his people's midst is what had been their great joy in the Garden of Eden, and he's working to bring them into his presence yet again. And that recall of the garden imagery, I think, is a really prominent theme here and a new creation that God's bringing about by his presence among his people.
No, I think you're absolutely right there. God really is establishing his a kind of a mini heaven on earth, right? Which was what Eden was. Yeah, it was this miniature heaven on earth where God's people got to dwell in fellowship with God, in union with God, in the midst of the beauty of God's creation. And so here we see in the temple, this is a beautiful imagery that's set forth in there.
One of the
Yeah, go
things
ahead.
that I think we should talk about here briefly, Pastor Dana, we've got about 3 minutes before our break, is with each of these elements, as you consider the purpose and function it served within what God wanted for his people, Israel, there's a little bit of a distinction between the nations around Israel. Talk a little bit about these two pillars in contrast to what you might have seen in your typical pagan temple in the area at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think this is and this is something I've been doing a lot of research on myself as of late. That a lot of the imagery that God employs in the Bible and the building of the temple and the tabernacle and all of these things really are often a polemic against the gods of the ancient Near East, right? And so you think about Baal and Asherah, Ishtar. Marduk, all of these gods of the ancient Near East. And so if you think about this, a lot of the ancient Near Eastern temples would have had massive idols of the gods they honored. Maybe a good example of this would have even been in the city of Babylon itself. You had what's called the Ishtar Gate. At the Ishtar Gate, you would have had all of these kind of images of the gods of Israel in there. Set, or not the gods of Israel, the gods of Babylon set around them, and namely Ishtar. You would have lions and all of these cool looking weird creatures, right? And yet here, God has these structures that don't give an image of the Lord, right? That God isn't going to be a massive idol to be honored, but they actually kind of give us the attributes and the work of the Lord. They represent what God is doing for his people. And so we see that God isn't bound up in, kind of an image of a winged lion or a bull like we see with Baal or anything like that. But it's this idea that God himself is greater than just an image. God is a God who acts. He's going to act on behalf of his people out of mercy. He's not going to be a God that must be appeased or manipulated, but he's a God that stands, and even in his name, right? We see this. He is a God who is, as he causes to be. His state of being isn't bound up in the creation, but it is over the creation where he exercises his control out of love for his people.
Yeah, so these are some of the beautiful things that we see as the temple furnishings are described in this chapter. The Lord is the true God. None of the idols of the nations are. We're going to keep looking at this chapter and the details that are in it on the other side of the break. You're listening to Sharper Iron on KFUO. We're talking to Pastor Jacob Dandy this morning. We will be right back. Please stick around.
Did you know that an investment with Lutheran Church Extension Fund exclusively supports LCMS ministries and church workers? That's right. LCEF ensures LCMS churches, schools, and organizations have access to the financial resources they need to sustain, strengthen, and start ministry work. In other words, you can feel good investing with LCEF because we share your Lutheran values and love for the church. Learn more at lcef.org. LCF is a nonprofit religious organization. Therefore, LCF investments are not FDIC insured bank deposit accounts. This is not an offer to sell investments or solicitation to buy. LCF will offer and sell its securities only in states where authorized. The offer is made solely by LCF's offering circular. Investors should carefully read the offering circular, which more fully describes associated risks.
Welcome back to Sharper Iron. It is Monday, May 12th. We're studying 1 Kings chapter 7, verses 1 to 51 with Pastor Jacob Dandy. He serves at Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Atchison, Kansas. Pastor Dandy, prior to the break, we had read about and discussed the two pillars that are set up. We continue now in verse 23 of 1 Kings 7 to hear about some water basins, one large and 10 a little bit smaller. So starting now at verse 23, then he made the sea of cast metal. It was round, 10 cubits from brim to brim, and 5 cubits high, and a line of 30 cubits measured its circumference. Under its brim were gourds for 10 cubits, compassing the sea all around. The gourds were in 2 rows, cast with it when it was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea was set on them, and all their rear parts were inward. Its thickness was a handbreadth, and its brim was made like the brim of a cup, like the flower of a lily. It held 2,000 baths. He also made the 10 stands of bronze. Each stand was 4 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high. This was the construction of the stands. They had panels, and the panels were set in the frames, and on the panels that were set in the frames were lions, oxen, and cherubim. On the frames, both above and below the lions and oxen, there were wreaths of beveled work. Moreover, each stand had 4 bronze wheels and axles of bronze, and at the four corners were supports for a basin. The supports were cast with wreaths at the side of each. Its opening was within a crown that projected upward 1 cubit. Its opening was round, as a pedestal is made, a cubit and a half deep. At its opening there were carvings, and its panels were square, not round. And the four wheels were underneath the panels. The axles of the wheels were of one piece with the stands, and the height of a wheel was a cubit and a half. The wheels were made like a chariot wheel. Their axles, their rims, their spokes, and their hubs were all cast. There were four supports at the four corners of each stand. The supports were of one piece with the stands. And on the top of the stand there was a round band half a cubit high, and on the top of the stand its stays and its panels were of one piece with it. And on the surfaces of the stays and on its panels he carved cherubim, lions, and palm trees, according to the space of each, with wreaths all around. After this manner he made the 10 stands. All of them were cast alike, of the same measure and the same form. And he made 10 basins of bronze. Each basin held 40 baths. Each basin measured 4 cubits, and there was a basin for each of the 10 stands. And he set the stands, 5 on the south side of the house, and 5 on the north side of the house. And he set the sea at the southeast corner of the house. All right, we'll pause there at verse 39 to talk about the sea, which is a large bathtub. I don't know if it's the greatest word, but it's a large basin of water that could have been used for and was used by a man to bathe. And then you have these smaller basins, 10 of them, that line the sides, also used for washing. The stands are described in great detail, which I just appreciate how much detail the author goes into in verses 27 to 37. It's almost like he was looking at one of these stands and was just so fascinated by the way that it was constructed that he felt this need to, and of course the Spirit understood the need for us to know these things. But it's remarkable the detail and the intricacy of the work that's recorded, especially in verses 27 to 37. So those are just some introductory comments. Take us into this section, Pastor Danny.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's you can overlook this a little bit, but we see that the sea would have held 2,000 baths of water. That's like 11,500 gallons of water. So this isn't like it's not like this dunk tank that we would have in like a church where somebody does baptisms or something, like one of the immersion baths or something, or anything like that. It's not like a day spa or something. This is like a swimming pool, right? Almost in size. And so this is a significant amount of water that is held here in the temple. And of course we see that water had purpose. Right, that there were lots of ritualistic purposes within the temple that required washing with water. Right, you needed for purification, for ritual purification. Right, so that you could be ceremonially clean. Lepers would come to the temple after they were declared clean to be washed. Right, the priest had to be daily washed and cleansed for their office and their work. Right, and so we see that the purpose of water, and this is kind of interesting too. You think about this. There are really two main elemental components, I guess, to the worship of God in this temple courtyard. One is going to be water, and maybe the other, from the sacrifices, of course, would be blood. Those are the two main things that you're going to see splashed all over the place, right? Yeah. You're going to have washing with water, and then you're going to have the pouring out of blood at the base of the temple, and the sprinkling of blood upon the people, and and all of these things, and both of these that really point to cleansing, right? We have this water that cleanses us, but also we have the ritual cleansing, the need for cleansing, but also then the blood that cleanses us, and this reality that there is the fact that we come before God with impurity and uncleanness, and what does God do? He washes us, right? Which, of course, for us in the church today, this is very evocative imagery of the baptism that we have in Christ. Christ who washes us in the waters of holy baptism. We also see in Revelation 7 We have washed our blood, Ross washed our robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. That we are made holy, we are made into saints, we are made sinless, and we live as the people of God because we have been washed in the blood. We also see this imagery in Ephesians 5 that, we talk about the bridegroom preparing his bride, and what does he do? He washes her in the water and the word, right? And so we have this kind of ongoing symbolism here that the priests needed a great source of water, but this water comes to demonstrate the living water of God, right? And of course, there's this overall reality there too. There's imagery with that. You have the 12 oxen under the sea, right? And this was an image of the 12 tribes of Israel, that they are arrayed in unity under God's care. That they exist as the tribes of Israel, the people of God, under the washing that God provides for them. And then you see that also with the stands, which these basins would be carted around in, where you see the first of God, you have once again all this beautiful imagery, this engraving, these angels, these cherubim, and all of this stuff on there once again, and you see this. Well, what's coming out from this washing, but heavenly life, right? Angels and flowers and pomegranates and beauty. That once again you're having this heaven on earth reality conveyed to you, right? And how is it conveyed to you? Well, it's conveyed to you in the worship of God, and Him cleansing you and purifying you, so that you might come before His presence in the hope and the realization of a pure conscience and the forgiveness of sins with confidence and joy, right? And so I think there's a lot that goes into these things.
Yeah, the prominence of water in this section is no accident. Once again, with the dwelling place of God, thinking back to the Garden of Eden, the 4 rivers that marked that garden that are mentioned in the book of Genesis, the water there is a very prominent feature. And of course, looking forward to the book of Revelation, the river is a very prominent feature in the new heavens and the new earth as well. There's a river that flows forth from the vision of the temple that Ezekiel sees in Ezekiel chapter 47. So the use of water in the place where God dwells is a very key feature here. Even just the way that this large basin is called the sea is of note. I mean, you could have used a different word for this large vessel. I mean, I don't know if Hebrew has a word for swimming pool, but you could have called it a great basin or something else. But it is called a sea, which is not an accident, I would think, for a number of reasons. Again, in Dr. Meyer's commentary, one of the things that he notes, it's in a footnote, but I think it's pretty significant, is that Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 talks about the Israelites being baptized in the sea and being baptized into Moses in the sea. And you're talking about baptism. Sometimes Lutherans get criticized for, well, every time there's water in the Bible, you Lutherans want to talk about baptism. Well, I think the Bible gives us license to talk about baptism in this case, particularly when it comes to the matter of it being named the sea, particularly. So make more of those connections. I know there's more out there.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, every event. Well, and and so if you want to even get more graphic, right? Every person is born through water and blood. Right, sure. It's kind of graphic imagery, but then you think about the birth of the people of Israel as a nation under God's care. What do? They pass through the water of the sea, then they go to Mount Sinai, and they are sprinkled in the blood of the covenant. Right, they are born as a people for God. Right, there's this new life that is set aside for the people. And I think that's the image that you're going to get as you're now walking into the courtyard of the temple. What I'm going to be living in this newness of life before my God. That this is all evocative energy. And then also when they enter into the promised land, once again, what do? They pass through the waters of the Jordan. Right, and so this idea of passing from water to water, there's this image that God is continually giving newness of life to His people. That God is continually working life for His people, and then of course even You think of Psalm 46, right, where you're in the fortress of God, right? That the God is that this is the chapter of Psalms that Martin Luther based "A mighty fortress is our God." But what do you think about that image of the city of God? What's in the midst of it? But it is a well overflowing with streams of living water, right? That God's people have life as he overflows streams of life, overflows them with streams of water, that he's blessing them, and so I think this imagery of water is very great. I think there is another polemical reality
Yeah.
there as well. That I think a lot of the imagery God uses has kind of a lot of that meaning behind it. You think about the gods of the ancient Near East. You have Baal. Baal has to go to war against Yam, the god of the sea. Same thing with Marduk. He fights against the sea dragon Tiamat, and he does so. And as they do so, this creates chaos and disorder, and they break up the chaos and disorder. And these gods gain their power by subduing these watery forces, right? But here we see the sea in Solomon's temple, this giant basin of water for washing. Um, uh, and that water is not a source of danger, but of purification, of order, of God's provision. It's set upon the oxen, right? God has domesticates the sea. He commands the sea, right? We see this with Jesus. The disciples say, "Who is this that even the sea and the wind obey him?" And so we see that God isn't struggling against chaos, but he commands it as the sea is tamed and controlled, because not only he's not a God who has to tame and contend against the sea, but even with the book of Jonah, right? What does Jonah say? He's the God who created the earth and the sea and that all that is in them, right? And so once again, we have this maybe an image of divine superiority of the Lord, that all these other gods, they claim these mighty acts of contending against the sea. And what do we see? Well, God has the sea in his temple, and he controls it, and he uses it for his own purposes, right?
Yeah,
And
that's a
so there's that
marvelous thing.
polemic against the false gods of the ancient world there too.
Yeah. So, and not only does he have, the sea there at his command, but then he can like take parts of that sea and move it around as he needs within the temple complex. So that's where
Yeah.
these 10 basins on the 10 stands come in. They would have they've got the wheels, so they're mobile. They can move, and you can fill them with water from the sea, and then take them to where is needed. Still the idea of washing, but maybe just talk a little bit more about their particular purpose. These 10 basins on 10 stands.
Yeah. So there, and really, I think there's some mobility, right? First of all, I think there's just the practical reality that you having a 12,000 gallon
Sure.
vessel filled with water. You need to be able to draw that and move stuff around. So there's a practical reality to that, but it's also, it's the idea that purity follows the priest and the people um, in the temple courtyard, the worshipers of God, and it comes to them. It's brought to them, right? That God has this idea that the purity of worship follows the priest where he serves, but also that it can be used according to God's purposes. And then, of course, we have the animals, the cherubs that are tied to all this. That you have God giving his strength in the ox, the royal authority in the lion, that heavenly guardianship in the cherub, right? These things are there. But also, just once again, it's just that this is an aspect of just God's command over heaven and earth. That God can command the waters, and God has command over heaven and earth. And what does he use his command? And I love this in our catechism. When we talk about thy kingdom come, and we talk about the kind of three different types of kingship that Christ has, right? He has the kingdom of power, where he rules in his authority over the heavens of earth. And he has his coming kingdom of glory, right, where he's going to establish himself on the last day, in the glory of the new heavens and the new earth and all of this stuff. But then in the catechism, it also talks about the kingdom of grace, right? And this is really what does God put his rule and authority, what purpose does he apply it to for his people? Well, it's his graciousness, right? And so we see God commanding the creation to bring his grace to his people, to purify them, to demonstrate his mercy, to forgive their sins, right? You have this image like in Galatians, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son. That God was directing all of creation and all the movements of creation and all the peoples of creation to this one point in time where the Son of God could come into the world, right? And this, you kind of get the same image with these movable stands and basins, that God is commanding creation and all of these things, the cherubs, the lions, the ox, and he commands them for the sake of the good of his people, to demonstrate mercy, to cleanse them of unrighteousness and impurity. And I think that's something to think about with all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there are a variety of other things needed for use in the temple, many of them of bronze, which Hiram also made. And then there's also some gold furnishings that are noted at the end of this chapter as well. So we're going to read the rest of 1 Kings 7, beginning now at verse 40. Hiram also made the pots, the shovels, and the basins. So Hiram finished all the work that he did for King Solomon on the house of the Lord: the 2 pillars, the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars, and the 2 lattice works to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars, and the 400 pomegranates for the 2 lattice works, 2 rows of pomegranates for each lattice work, to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the pillars, the 10 stands and the 10 basins on the stands, and the 1 sea and the 12 oxen underneath the sea. Now the pots, the shovels, and the basins, all of these vessels in the house of the Lord, which Hiram made for King Solomon, were of burnished bronze. In the plain of the Jordan the king cast them, in the clay ground between Succoth and Zarethan. And Solomon left all the vessels unweighed, because there were so many of them. The weight of the bronze was not ascertained. So Solomon made all the vessels that were in the house of the Lord: the golden altar, the golden table for the bread of the presence, the lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north, before the inner sanctuary, the flowers, the lamps, and the tongs of gold, the cups, snuffers, basins, dishes for incense, and fire pans of pure gold, and the sockets of gold for the doors of the innermost part of the house, the most holy place, and for the doors of the nave of the temple. Thus all the work that King Solomon did on the house of the Lord was finished, and Solomon brought in the things that David his father had dedicated, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and stored them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. All right, that's the end of our text for today through 1 Kings chapter 7. So we've got more bronze things, almost a summary of a lot of things we've talked about with a few other items, then gold things, and then lastly, treasures there at the end. We've got about 7 minutes left to talk about these last sections.
Yeah, yeah, and so you have the other bronze stuff, right? And really, these are just kind of necessary tools, right? You think about the shovels and the pots and the basins. These are just things you need, right? If you're going to be burning sacrifices on the altar of God, you're going to need shovels to clean out, to stoke the fire, to clean out the ashes, to move the ashes. These types of things. Basins to pour out the blood of the offering, all of the sacrifice. They're just things that are going to be necessary. But we see that these aren't just things that are overlooked. These are things that are going to be detailed and made of bronze, and they're going to be good. And then, of course, we have kind of the reciting of the things that they're already there. So you have the pomegranates and the lattice work and all of that stuff. And it's built, and it's made well. And, praise God for that, right? But then you go into the temple itself, right, where they start talking about the vessels that go inside the temple. So you'll have the golden altar, right? This would be the altar for burning incense. The priest would go in daily, pray before the Lord, burn incense before God. The prayers of God would ascend it like a fragrant offering of incense. And so we remember what's the focus and what's one of the main things, ideas behind the temple. Well, it is a house of prayer for all the people of God, or for all people, for all nations, really, that all people could turn to the temple of God and pray in faith to the God of Israel, denouncing the gods of the world, and receive blessings for that, right? And so then you have the table of the bread of presence, or the table of showbread. This is another golden vessel, where you have the 12 loaves set on the temple. Every week, at the end of the week, the priest would consume and eat that bread of the presence. Once again, this was a reminder of God's provision and care for his people. He provides them with the bread that they need for life. And then, once again, there's that Christological reality there. Jesus is the bread of life. He is the bread from heaven, and he is God's ultimate provision for us. We have the golden lampstands, 5 on the north side, 5 on the south side, right? Where you have, once again, God providing light. I think there's a cool idea there too, that the ancient world, they would worship light, quite literally. That the Canaanites in Mesopotamia would worship celestial lights like the sun and the moon and the stars, even though they had no divine power within them. They would just worship them outright. But what do we see here in the house of God? God is the source of light. The temple here shows that the light comes from the place of God's house. It is his dwelling place. It is from God. And we think about, Genesis chapter 1, God says, let there be light, right? And so you have that idea there. We have the God who answers prayer, right? At the incense altar, that God isn't manipulated by our prayers, but he answers our prayers just because he loves his people. And so we have that beautiful thing. And then just you think about the table of showbread, the table of presence, the incense altar, the lampstands. Once again, they are of gold. They are made of beautiful things that they show us that heaven is glorious. That there is glory in the house of God. The things that are used within the temple, the tongs for handling the incense and the coals, the cups, the snuffers, the basins, the dishes, all of these things are of pure gold. And also then you see the sockets of gold, that these would have been maybe for mounting the Ark of the Covenant in the most holy place, in the holy place that was on the other end of the temple. And so we see all of these things kind of taking out that God's house is glorious, that God's from God and in God. It's funny. Most people would have used gold for wealth or for adornment for themselves, making of jewelry. What is it? Gold is simply building material in the house of God, right? That God gives wealth beyond gold and silver. And so we see the kind of overall beauty and the glory of God's temple. And then beyond that, we also see the dedicated treasures that David in his conquest and in his victories has now taking the treasures that he has won, and he's set them aside for sacred use and for sacred dedication to the maintenance of the house of God. Right, that God's people need now resources to keep this place and to honor this place and to do all of those things. And so you have the sacred treasures from King David as well.
Yeah, and fitting that here at the end of the account of the construction of the temple, David is mentioned again, as you noted. His was the godly desire to build the house, even though he did not himself construct it. He had already made preparations, and now we have that reminder of the house that David desired, and ultimately the house that God is building for David and for David's son, not only Solomon, but Jesus. Also to see the matter of the true treasure here is found in the temple, not in the palace that we heard about at the beginning of the chapter, but here is the treasury of the Lord. It is found in the temple where the Lord distributes his gifts for his people. Pastor Jacob Dandy serves at Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Atchison, Kansas. He's been helping us today to study 1 Kings chapter 7, verses 1 to 51. Pastor Dandy, thanks for being our guest today.
It's always a pleasure.
I am your host here on Sharper Iron, Pastor Timothy Appel of Faith Lutheran Church in Godfrey, Illinois. If you have any questions about 1 Kings 7, send an email to kfuo@kfuo.org. It is always a joy to hear from you. Join us again tomorrow as we read beginning in 1 Kings chapter 8, when the ark is brought to the temple and King Solomon begins his prayer of dedication for this place where the Lord sets his name. Thanks for spending the morning with us today. Talk with you again tomorrow.
Showing support for KFUO is now easier than ever. You can sport a KFUO shirt, swag, or even socks by visiting our online store. Go to kfuo.org/store and order high-quality KFUO-branded merch. You no longer need to wait for our annual share-a-thon for a chance to show your KFUO spirit. Visually share and wear this ministry out in the world by checking out our selection. Every purchase helps to support our proclamation of Christ for you, anytime, anywhere. Go to kfuo.org/store.